Okay, good morning. At approximately 8 a.m. this morning, deputies from Lakewood Station responded to the 500 block of Lorelei Avenue in the city of Lakewood regarding an assault with a deadly weapon call. Upon arrival, they contacted a female who had run out of the house, and they immediately detained her. As they entered the location and walked through the house, they found two females and a male, all of which were suffering from gunshot wounds to their upper torso. Those individuals were pronounced dead at the scene.
7:55 a.m. deputies are racing to a quiet street in Lakewood, California, but they are already too late for two of them. Inside a home on the 580 block of Lorelei Avenue, a mother is dead in her bedroom. Down the hall, her 17-year-old daughter, a soccer player, a teenager, gone, and the man who did it, he is not finished. 19-year-old Desiree Aguilera wakes up to the sound of gunshots. Before she can run, before she can even breathe, her door opens. Her own father walks in, raises the gun, and fires once, twice, three times, point-blank range. She is still standing. What does a 19-year-old do in the seconds after her father tries to kill her? What did she say about him afterwards? Words so haunting they spread through an entire community and never left. And why did a husband and father walk into his family's bedrooms that morning and never walk back out? Those answers are coming. Welcome to Blood Betrayal Files. This is Case of the Day. If you are new here, subscribe right now and drop a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from. Now, let us get into it. To understand what happened on January 15, 2026, you have to understand who these people were before that morning. Before the gunshots, before the deputies, before any of it. The Alfaro home sat on the 580 block of Lorelei Avenue near South Street in Lakewood, California. Lakewood is the kind of city people describe as ordinary in the best possible way. Quiet residential blocks, tree-lined streets, the kind of neighborhood where kids ride bikes and neighbors wave from driveways. It sits in Los Angeles County, built after World War II with the specific promise of the American dream. Affordable homes, good schools, a place to raise a family and build something that lasts. And for a time, that is exactly what this family appeared to be doing. Roxana Rodriguez was 48 years old. By every account left behind by the people who loved her, she was the kind of woman who held things together. Her daughter Desiree would later describe her as a devoted mother. Not a word chosen carelessly, a specific word chosen deliberately by a daughter who knew exactly what she wanted the world to understand. Devoted, present, there. Roxana was the kind of mother whose children felt it, whose presence in a room meant something. To know her, Desiree said, was to love her. That is not a eulogy written by someone reciting what they were supposed to say. That is grief with a face on it. Sienna Alfaro was 17. She went by Lily, a nickname her teammates used so naturally it appeared in their tributes without explanation, the way nicknames do when they genuinely fit a person. Lily played soccer for Beach Football Club. If you have ever been part of a team sport, you understand what that means beyond the game itself. Early morning practices, long drives to tournaments, inside jokes built over seasons. Coaches who watch you grow and teammates who become something close to family. Lily had all of that. She was embedded in a community of people who chose to be around her. People who would later stand at a candlelight vigil 2 days after she died and struggle to find words big enough for what they had lost. 17 years old, a player, a teammate, a daughter, a girl who still had decades of life sitting in front of her. And then there was Desiree, 19 years old, the eldest daughter, already building her own life alongside her husband Andrew Aguilera. But on the morning of January 15th, Desiree was still there, still under that roof, still part of the household on Lorelei Avenue. And Hector Lionel Alfaro was 52 years old, the father of these daughters, the husband of Roxana, the man whose name is now permanently attached to this address, this date, this case. What we know about who Hector was before January 15th is limited by what has been made public. Authorities released no prior history. No incidents at that address have been publicly reported. No statements from extended family painting a picture of what life inside that home actually looked like behind closed doors. And that silence matters. Because in cases like this, the silence before is often where the real story lives. Domestic violence does not always announce itself to the neighborhood. It does not always produce police reports or visible bruises. Sometimes it lives entirely inside four walls, invisible to everyone outside, known only to the people breathing the same air every single day. We do not know with certainty what those walls held. What we do know is this. At some point, Hector Alfaro made a decision. Not in an instant. Decisions this catastrophic rarely are. They build slowly, layer by layer, out of whatever was happening inside that man and inside that home. And by the time January 15th arrived, whatever had been building had reached a point of no return. The house on Loreley Avenue looked like any other house on the block until it didn't. January 15, 2026, a Thursday morning, the kind of morning that starts like every other one. The sun coming up over Los Angeles County. The neighborhood on Loreley Avenue still mostly quiet. People in surrounding houses probably still in bed or making coffee or getting ready for work. The ordinary machinery of an ordinary day beginning to turn. Inside the Alfaro home, something else was already in motion. We do not know exactly what time Hector Alfaro woke up that morning. We do not know if he slept at all. We do not know if there was an argument first, raised voices, a confrontation, something that escalated before it crossed a line it could never uncross. We do not know if the house was silent or if there were words. What we know is what the physical evidence told deputies when they arrived, and what the one person who survived told them when she called. What we know is what happened. Roxana Rodriguez was in her bedroom when her husband came in and shot her. 48 years old, a devoted mother, by her daughter's own words. She was in her own home, in her own room, in the place where a person is supposed to be safest. And Hector Alfaro shot and killed her there. Let that sit for a moment. Because it is easy in true crime to move quickly through facts, to let the timeline carry you forward without stopping to register what each moment actually means. So stop here for just a second. Roxana Rodriguez woke up that morning, or maybe she never fully woke up. Maybe it happened before she had any idea it was coming. Either way, she was alive, and then she wasn't, and the man who did it was someone who had shared her life. Sat across from her at dinner tables, stood beside her at family events, made children with her, built a household with her. The person who ended her life was not a stranger. He was the most familiar person in her world. That is the specific cruelty of domestic homicide that statistics cannot fully capture. The betrayal is not a side detail. It is the entire architecture of the crime. From Roxana's bedroom, Hector moved down the hallway. To another bedroom, Sienna, Lily, 17 years old, still asleep or just waking in the early morning hours of a Thursday. A girl with soccer practice scheduled, teammates waiting, a whole life arranged in front of her. She was in her own room, in her own bed, in the same house where she had grown up. Hector Alfaro shot and killed his daughter in that room. 2 bedrooms, 2 victims, the same house, the same man. Moving from one to the other with a deliberateness that is almost impossible to process from the outside. This was not a single moment of violence that ended before it could be stopped. This was sequential. A man making his way through his own home, taking the lives of the people inside it, one room at a time. 2 firearms would later be recovered at the scene. The presence of 2 weapons matters. It suggests this was not accidental. It suggests preparation. It suggests that whatever happened that morning was decided before it began. And then he came to Desiree's room. Desiree Aguilera, 19 years old. She was asleep when the gunshots woke her. Think about what that moment is like, being pulled out of sleep not by an alarm or sunlight, but by gunfire inside your own home. Before your brain can catch up to what your ears just heard, before you can orient yourself or understand what is happening, the door to your room opens. Her father walks in, the same man who raised her, who she had known every single day of her 19 years of life. He is standing in her doorway with a gun, and he raises it, and he fires. The first shot misses. He fires again. The second shot misses. He fires a third time. The third shot misses. 3 shots, point-blank range, and Desiree Aguilera is still alive. We do not know exactly how she moved, whether she threw herself to the side, dropped to the floor, whether something gave her cover, whether Hector's hands were shaking, whether pure survival reflex took over before her conscious mind could form a thought. What we know is the outcome. 3 bullets fired at close range by a man who had already proven that morning he was willing to kill, and none of them found her. In such a tragedy, we use the word survivor carefully. Because it carries weight, it means someone looked directly at death and came out the other side still carrying everything they just witnessed. Desiree Aguilera, in the space of a few minutes on a Thursday morning, had her entire world unmade. Her mother was gone, her sister was gone, her father had just tried to add her to that count and failed, and she was still standing. What happened next tells you something about who Desiree is. She did not collapse. She stayed present enough to witness what came next, because what came next happened right in front of her. Hector Alfaro walked to the den, and there, in the den of the family home, he turned the gun on himself. He died by suicide at the scene. The man who had moved through that house with such lethal purpose, who had fired at his own daughter 3 times without hitting her, ended his own life in the same building where he had taken 2 others. The den. A room that in a different life would have just been where they watched television together in the evenings. Hector Lionel Alfaro, 52 years old, died there. 2 firearms recovered, 3 people shot, 2 fatally. One Desiree alive in a way that still feels almost impossible to fully explain. At 7:55 in the morning, Desiree picks up the phone. She calls 911. Imagine making that call. Your mother is dead in her bedroom. Your sister is dead in her bedroom. Your father is dead in the den. You are the only living person in that house. You are 19 years old and you are standing in the middle of all of it, and you pick up the phone and you dial and you wait for someone to answer. That call brought Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies racing to Lorelei Avenue. Neighbors who heard the shots now heard the sirens. The quiet Thursday morning was over. The scene was secured quickly. Authorities confirmed there was no ongoing threat to the surrounding neighborhood. There was no one left to threaten anyone. It had already ended the way Hector apparently intended it to end, for everyone except Desiree.
The female was taken to Lakewood. The surviving female was taken to Lakewood Station. And I'll answer questions now.
You believe that female that was taken to the station was responsible for
Investigators have not interviewed her yet, so we don't know.
It's murder-suicide that rolled out. Is it that someone else did this to you?
There is no outside threat. There is no threat to the community at this point. I will let the captain address any community issues, but we have not ruled anything out at this point.
The investigation moved quickly because the case, structurally, was not complicated. All parties were accounted for. The sequence of events was traceable through physical evidence and Desiree's account. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department classified it as a domestic murder-suicide and closed the investigation without publicly identifying a motive. That last part bears repeating. No motive was ever publicly released. In a case where a man killed his wife, killed his teenage daughter, attempted to kill his eldest daughter, and then died by his own hand, the question of why has never been answered publicly. Not from law enforcement, not from any official statement. The why remains a silence sitting at the center of this entire case. And sometimes in true crime, the silence is the most important thing of all, because someone knows, Desiree knows. What she said and how she said it is what we are getting into right now. There's a specific kind of silence that follows a tragedy like this one. Not the silence of peace, not the silence of resolution, the silence of a house that was full of people and is now not. The silence of a phone that keeps getting notifications for someone who will never read them. The silence of a soccer bag by the door waiting for a practice that will never happen. The silence of a bedroom that still smells like the person who slept in it, even after they are gone. That is the silence Desiree Aguilera walked out of on January 15, 2026, 19 years old. A husband waiting for her in the world outside, and behind her, everything she had ever known as home reduced to a crime scene with yellow tape and strangers in gloves photographing the rooms where her family used to live. Most people, when they try to imagine surviving something like this, stop at the moment of the shooting. They imagine the fear, the chaos, the adrenaline, but the part that does not get talked about enough, the part that is in many ways harder than the violence itself, is what comes after. The hours after, the days after. The moment when the adrenaline leaves your body and reality settles in like something heavy and permanent, and you understand fully that this is not something you are going to wake up from. Desiree did not have the option of falling apart immediately. In the immediate aftermath, there were statements to give, a community about to descend with grief and questions and love all tangled together. And in the middle of all of that, Desiree Aguilera found words. She spoke publicly in the days following the shooting. And what she said about her mother has stayed with everyone who heard it. She said Roxana was a devoted mother. And she said, and this is the part that lands differently the more you sit with it, that to know her was to love her. To know her was to love her. That sentence did not come from a publicist. It came from a 19-year-old daughter whose response to watching her father try to erase her mother from the world was to make absolutely sure the world knew who Roxana Rodriguez was. Not as a victim, not as a statistic. As a person, as a mother, as someone whose presence in a room made people feel something real. That is an act of love, and it is also an act of resistance. Because when a person is killed the way Roxana was killed, by someone who was supposed to protect her, there is a risk that her story gets swallowed entirely by the story of the man who took her life, that the headlines become about him while she becomes a footnote in her own murder. Desiree refused to let that happen, and then there is what Desiree said about her father. This is the part that haunts people. She did not speak about Hector the way you might expect, not the way most people would speak about a man who killed her mother, killed her sister, and fired 3 shots at her head. She did not reduce him entirely to the worst thing he ever did, which would have been more than understandable. What she said reflected something more painful than hatred. It reflected the wreckage of love. The confusion of grief that does not follow a clean line because the person you are grieving is also the person who caused all the other grief. The impossible position of being the child of someone who destroyed your family, loving a version of a person that existed before a morning that changed everything, trying to reconcile who someone was with what they did. True crime rarely has space for that kind of complexity. The narratives we build tend toward clean conclusions: monster, victim, hero. We want the lines clear because clear lines are easier to carry. But Desiree reminded everyone paying attention that real families are not built from clean lines. They are built from years of ordinary moments, meals and arguments and birthdays, and the particular way a parent said your name. And when violence shatters that, what remains is not just grief. It is grief layered over grief, loss folded inside loss, with no clear place to put any of it. The community heard her, and they showed up. 2 days after the shooting, on January 17, 2026, a candlelight vigil was held in Lakewood to honor Roxana and Sienna. The neighborhood came, friends came, coaches came. Teammates from beach football club stood in the January night with candles in their hands and said goodbye to a girl who was supposed to have decades of life left. Vigils do something that investigations cannot. Investigations reconstruct what happened. Vigils reconstruct who it happened to. They insist on the humanity of the people at the center of the story in a way a crime report never can. They say loudly, this person mattered, this loss is real, and we are going to stand here together in the broken place and refuse to let these names become just names. Roxana Rodriguez mattered, Sienna Lily Alfaro mattered. Desiree's husband Andrew organized a GoFundMe to help the family rebuild practically and financially. The response from strangers who had never met Roxana, who had never watched Lily play a single minute of soccer, reflected exactly what Desiree's words had done. The love radiated outward past the people who knew them and reached people who never had the chance. There is a word used in trauma research, witness, not just in the legal sense, but in the deeper sense of someone present for an event they did not choose, could not stop, and will now carry permanently. Desiree Aguilera is a witness in both senses. She saw what happened, and she will carry what she saw for the rest of her life. That is what January 15, 2026 left behind. We need to talk about the why. Not because the why excuses anything, not because understanding the conditions that produce a morning like January 15th softens what happened in those bedrooms, but because if we sit with cases like this and never ask the harder questions, never look at the patterns, never examine how something like this builds until it explodes, then we are only telling half the story. And the half we leave out is the half that might matter most to someone watching this right now who is living inside a situation they do not yet have a name for. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department classified what happened at 580 Lorelei Avenue as a domestic murder-suicide. Those 3 words appear in cases like this so regularly they have almost become their own category of tragedy. A filing system for the unspeakable. But what those words describe, when you pull them apart, is something that almost never begins on the morning it ends. Domestic homicide does not arrive without a history. That is not a theory. That is what decades of research tell us with remarkable consistency. The vast majority of domestic homicides are preceded by patterns of control, patterns of intimidation, behavior that, viewed from the outside after the fact, forms a shape recognizable to anyone trained to see it, and sometimes, heartbreakingly, even to the people who lived inside it and still could not find a way out. We do not have confirmed details about the history inside the Alfaro household. No restraining orders, no prior calls, no public documentation of reported abuse have been made available. That absence of public record is important to acknowledge honestly. We are not going to fill that silence with speculation dressed up as fact, but here is what that silence does not mean. It does not mean nothing was happening. One of the most persistent myths surrounding domestic violence is the idea that if it were really serious, there would be a paper trail, police reports, neighbors who heard something. Some official record that would allow people on the outside to say, yes, there were signs. Yes, someone tried to get help. The reality is far more complicated. Studies examining domestic homicide cases consistently find that many victims had never called police before the incident that killed them. Not because nothing was happening, but because calling the police is not a simple or safe decision when you are living inside an abusive situation. It can escalate danger. It can provoke the exact violence it is meant to prevent. It can cost you your housing, your income, your children, your relationship with family who pressure you to stay. The barriers between a person living inside domestic violence and the systems designed to help them are not inconveniences. They are enormous, structural, and in many cases genuinely life-threatening to try to navigate. And so people stay silent, not because they are weak, but because the calculus of survival inside an abusive relationship is more complex than anyone on the outside can fully appreciate. There's also a specific pattern researchers have identified in cases that end in murder-suicide. It has a name. Familicide, the killing of a spouse and children by a family member, typically the father, typically followed by the perpetrator's own suicide. What research tells us about the men who commit it is both illuminating and unsettling. These are not, as a rule, men with long criminal histories. They are often men who, from the outside, appeared functional, present in their children's lives, embedded in their community, men whose neighbors later said they never saw it coming and meant it because the violence was contained entirely within the walls of the home. What the research does find, consistently, is a cluster of internal conditions. A pathological need for control within the family unit. A sense of ownership over a spouse and children that goes beyond love into something possessive and suffocating. A fragile self-image that cannot survive the perceived loss of that control, whether through a partner leaving, financial collapse, or simply the ordinary process of children growing up and becoming independent people who no longer need to be controlled. And underneath all of it, in case after case, a decision, consciously or not, that if the family cannot be his, it will not exist at all. That pattern is not unique to any one community, income level, or cultural background. Familicide does not discriminate. It happens on quiet residential streets in places that look exactly like Lakewood, California. Hector Alfaro was 52 years old. He had a wife he had built a life with. 2 daughters, one still a teenager, one already married and stepping into her own future. Whatever was happening inside that household leading up to January 15th, the decision he made that Thursday morning was the decision of a man who had arrived at a place where the people around him had become, in his mind, something he could take with him rather than something he had to let go of. That is the heart of familicide. That is the terrifying logic at its center. And it is a logic that Roxana and Sienna and Desiree did not create, did not invite, and did not deserve in any measure. The why in this case may never be officially answered. But the shape of the why, the conditions, the patterns, the systems that fail people before the worst morning of their lives arrives, that shape is visible. It has been documented, it has been studied, and it is something all of us are capable of learning to recognize. For someone watching this right now, that recognition might be everything. We have walked through all of it now. The quiet street, the ordinary Thursday morning. The sequence of rooms, the 3 shots that missed, the 911 call, the vigil candles, the words Desiree found for her mother when most people would have had no words at all. The patterns that research tells us almost always exist beneath the surface of mornings like January 15th. And that is all, and that can be everything. For everyone else, for everyone who stayed until the end because you believe these stories deserve to be told with the weight they actually carry, thank you. Thank you for letting Roxana and Lily's story matter to you, bearing witness to what happened on Lorelei Avenue, to who these women were and what was taken from them, and what Desiree survived. That is an act of respect. And respect is what every victim of domestic homicide deserves, and so rarely fully receives. If this case moved you, share this video, not for the numbers, but because somewhere out there, someone might watch it who needed to hear exactly what was said in the last 2 minutes. You never know whose life a share reaches. If you're new here, subscribe. Every case on this channel is handled the same way this one was, with the facts, with the victims at the center, with the questions that need asking even when they are uncomfortable, and with the respect every human life deserves. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Tell us what stayed with you from this case. The conversation in the comments is part of how these women's names stay alive. We will see you in the next case.